Okay, let's go. Number 1. Gadriel. The third name in 1 Enoch chapter 69 comes with a specific crime written next to it. The being is called Gadriel, and the crime, according to R.H. Charles's 1912 translation, is that he led Eve astray. Not the serpent, a watcher, a named being from the class that descended to earth in 1 Enoch chapter 6, swore an oath on Mount Hermon, and came down through the daughters of men. That is the being 1 Enoch chapter 69. Verse 6 holds responsible for what happened in the garden. He it is who showed the children of men all the blows of death. And he led astray Eve, and showed the weapons of death to the sons of men, the shield and the coat of mail, and the sword for battle, and all the weapons of death to the children of men. What nobody in the Genesis account was told is what 1 Enoch chapter 69 names directly. A watcher, a crime report, a list, shield, coat of mail, sword, all weapons of death, and before any of those, the act of leading Eve astray. And no, I'm not making that up. The text does not harmonize this with Genesis 3. It does not explain the serpent or assign the serpent a different role. It simply names Gadriel as the one who did what Genesis 3 describes a serpent doing. 2 texts, 2 attributions, no reconciliation. 1 Enoch chapter 69 makes its claim without hedging it against the other account. But here's the detail that everyone missed at the time. Gadriel's crime list has 2 parts. The first is the Eden transgression. The second is the weapons transmission. These are not the same thing, and they are not from the same event. The shield, the coat of mail, the sword, that is a separate teaching, directed at the sons of men broadly. The instruction in death dealing came after whatever happened in the garden. The text holds both in the same entry, under the same name, as if they belong together. A being who entered the most protected space in the created world, and then turned outward, and began arming humanity with the means to kill each other. Azazel in 1 Enoch chapter 8 taught metalworking and the making of weapons, among other things. Gadriel in chapter 69 teaches weapons specifically, the shield, the coat of mail, the sword, as a distinct list. The 2 entries overlap in content but are given to different beings. That is not a scribal error in the Charles text. It is how the tradition sorted the transmissions. Multiple watchers carried overlapping knowledge, and the record kept them separate. The containment 1 Enoch describes for Gadriel is the same valleys that hold the 200. Chapter 10 gives the sentence for the watchers as a group, bound under the hills of the earth until the day of the great judgment, when they will be cast into the fire. Gadriel's prison is not named with geographic precision the way Azazel's is. Azazel goes to Dudael, to a named desert, under specific jagged rocks. Gadriel goes with the rest, the valleys, the dark places under the hills. The containment that is general in location and permanent in duration. What the Book of Enoch records for Gadriel is a crime report, not a character study. He led Eve astray. He taught weapons of death. He was bound. The text moves on. That is the framework this list operates inside. Not extended descriptions of who these beings were. Specific entries, specific crimes, specific sentences. And for most of the beings in this text, those sentences are already in operation. The watchers are in the valleys. Their prisons are in place. The divine response to each transgression has been delivered and is running. But before that, there is something in 1 Enoch chapter 69 that comes before Gadriel. The chapter opens with a name that most readers skip because it does not appear in the famous descent account in chapter 6. It is not Semjaza, it is not Azazel. It is the being who, according to 1 Enoch chapter 69, verse 4, led all the sons of God astray before the descent began. The being who, according to the text, came before the event everyone knows about. His name is Yekon, and the crime the text assigns him puts everything else in a different order. Number 2. Yekon. The first name in 1 Enoch chapter 69 is not Azazel. It is not Semjaza. It is a being named Yekon, and the text gives him a specific function. He led all the sons of God astray. 1 Enoch chapter 69, verse 4, R.H. Charles 1912. The first was named Yekon. It was he who led astray all the sons of God, and brought them down to the earth, and led them astray through the daughters of men. Every common retelling of the Watcher descent credits Semjaza. In 1 Enoch chapter 6, Semjaza is the one who gathers the 200 on Mount Hermon, binds them with an oath so that no one can back out, and leads the descent. He names himself first. He is the one who fears acting alone, and demands the oath before he will proceed. Chapter 6 gives him the role and the name recognition that has followed him into every modern discussion of the Watcher tradition. But the version you've heard is not the full picture. Chapter 69 opens with a being the descent account in Chapter 6, never names. Yekon's crime is not descending to earth. It is not taking human wives. It is not teaching forbidden knowledge to the sons of men. His crime is that he turned the sons of God toward the desire to descend before the event in Chapter 6 happened. He corrupted the holy ones from inside their own order before they ever came down, before Semjaza gathered anyone on any mountain. The word the text uses is led astray, the same phrase used for Gadriel's role in the Eden transgression, but there it applied to one woman. Here it applies to all of them. Not some of the sons of God, all. What Yekon represents in the book of Enoch's accounting is a prior cause. The oath on Mount Hermon had a leader in Semjaza. But chapter 69 opens with the being who made that leader willing, who first introduced the corruption of will into the sons of God as a group, who moved them toward desire before Semjaza moved them toward action. Yekon is upstream of the event that every retelling begins from. By the time Semjaza stands on Mount Hermon proposing an oath, Yekon's work is already done. The text gives no mechanism, no scene, no dialogue, no description of how he did it. Just the entry, name, crime, category. The crime log format of Chapter 69 does not slow down for any of its subjects. It names them, assigns their crime, and moves to the next. What the placement tells you is significant. Of all the names in Chapter 69, Yekon is listed first. Not Gadriel, not Penemue, not Kasdeja. The being whose crime preceded the event comes first in the list. Whatever ordering principle Chapter 69 uses, it puts the instigator at the top. The containment is the same as the others. Bound in the valleys of the earth with the Watchers who descended. No separate location, no marker distinguishing the instigator from the participants. The prison does not grade culpability. Yekon, who never descended into history under his own name, never appeared in the famous Chapter 6 gathering, never swore on Mount Hermon, sits in the same valleys as the beings who did all of that. The sentence is not calibrated to the degree of participation. It is calibrated to the fact of involvement. I mean, think about that for a second. The being who first corrupted the desire of the sons of God before the descent, who turned all of them, receives the same prison as the ones who descended and taught and built the bloodlines and caused the earth to cry out. Same valleys, same duration, no distinction. The second name in Chapter 69 describes a crime that is even more stripped down than Yekon's. Yekon led the Watchers to descend. The being after him, Aspiel, didn't descend. He stayed back. And the text says he gave counsel, evil counsel, and the sons of God took it, and then they crossed the boundary. What it costs to give advice that sends holy beings into transgression is exactly what it costs to lead them there yourself. And the text has that answer. Number 3. Aspiel. The second name in 1 Enoch chapter 69 describes a crime that is one step removed from everything that followed. 1 Enoch chapter 69, verse 5. R.H. Charles 1912. The second was named Aspiel. He imparted to the holy sons of God evil counsel, and led them astray, so that they defiled their bodies with the daughters of men. That is the entire entry. Counsel, given to the holy sons of God. The counsel led them astray. They defiled their bodies as a result. Aspiel does not appear in the famous gathering on Mount Hermon in 1 Enoch chapter 6. He is not listed among the 200 who swore the oath at an elevation of 9,232 feet. The text does not describe him coming down to earth, does not assign him a specific human teaching, does not place him among the beings who took human wives. He is in chapter 69 only, in the second entry of the crime log, with one line attached to his name. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains the book of Enoch's entire approach to culpability. Aspiel's crime is purely communicative. He said something. The holy sons of God heard it and acted. The defilement that followed, the taking of wives, the transmission of forbidden knowledge, the Nephilim, the war, the earth's accusation, the divine intervention, all of it, follows from Aspiel's word. In some chain the text identifies without fully detailing. What the entry shows is that first Enoch holds the counselor responsible at the same level as the participants. The word the text uses for Aspiel's leading astray is the same verb used for Yekon's leading astray, and for Gadriel's leading astray of Eve. The same action category regardless of whether the leading astray happened through corruption of desire, delivery of counsel, or direct transgression in the garden. The verb covers all three. The crime log treats them as equivalent, and the sentence is the same. Bound in the valleys of the earth with every being who descended, who took wives, who taught smelting, and cosmetics, and warfare, and the signs of the moon. Aspiel, who gave a word, shares a prison with those who used bodies and built bloodlines. The text does not offer a graduated sentencing structure. The counsel and the act draw the same response. This is the detail that makes First Enoch's legal framework unusual, compared to the legal codes that surrounded it in the ancient Near East. Mesopotamian omen texts from roughly 1700 BCE distinguish between the one who performs an act and those who enable it. The distinction between agent and cause is ancient. The Book of Enoch does not use it. Yekon, who corrupted desire. Aspiel, who gave counsel. Gadriel, who entered the garden. Penemue, who taught writing. The valleys contain them all, without sorting them by how direct their role was. The sentence for speech is identical to the sentence for action. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. What chapter 69 builds with its first three entries is a before picture of the Watcher descent. The famous narrative in chapter 6 begins with the oath on Mount Hermon, but chapter 69 opens with two beings who came before that oath: Yekon, who corrupted the will, and Aspiel, who gave the counsel that directed the corrupted will toward a specific act. By the time Semjaza stands on the mountain proposing the oath, Yekon has already done his work, and Aspiel has already spoken. Chapter 69 traces the causality behind the causality. The fourth name in that chapter taught something with none of the qualities of counsel or corruption. He taught a skill, a human skill, the kind that produces records and contracts and histories and confirmation of good faith between parties. He taught writing with ink and paper. And 1 Enoch chapter 69, verse 10, says the damage from that single transmission is still running. Many sinned from eternity to eternity, and until this day. Not sinned at the time, until this day. The transmission that made the damage permanent is the next entry. Number 4. Penemue. The third entry in chapter 69's crime log described a teaching, not a corruption of desire, not counsel that directed the will of others, but a skill transmitted to human beings. The being is named Penemue, and the skill is writing. 1 Enoch chapter 69, verses 8 through 11. R.H. Charles, 1912. The fourth was named Penemue. He taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet, and he taught them all the secrets of their wisdom. And he instructed mankind in writing with ink and paper, and thereby many sinned from eternity to eternity and until this day. For men were not created for such a purpose, to give confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. For men were created exactly like the angels, to the intent that they should continue pure and righteous, and death, which destroys everything, could not have taken hold of them. But through this, their knowledge, they are perishing. Read the last section of that again. Men were created exactly like the angels. The intent was that they remain pure and righteous. Death had no mechanism for taking hold of them. That is what the entry describes as the original design for human beings, before Penemue's transmission changed the condition. What Penemue transmitted was literacy, writing with ink and paper. The text does not frame this as an incidental harm. It frames writing as the transmission that made death's hold on human beings permanent. Through the knowledge that Penemue passed on, human beings are perishing. The verb is present tense. Not. They sinned then, in the period of the Watchers, and the chain ended. Many sinned from eternity to eternity, and until this day. Here is how the entry explains the problem. Men were not created for such a purpose as giving confirmation to their good faith with pen and ink. When you write something down, you produce a record that can be held against you, a contract, a testimony, a debt, a legal claim. Writing is the instrument of formal obligation, accountability at a distance, across time, between parties who are not present to one another. That kind of infrastructure was not in the design. Oral communication between parties who are present was the structure human beings were made for. Penemue introduced a mechanism by which those structures became documented, enforceable, and durable. And through that, death, which had no foothold, found one. The bitter and the sweet. The entry says, Penemue taught both. That phrase points to a transmission of evaluative capacity, the ability to distinguish between the pleasant and the aversive, the desirable and the harmful. In wisdom traditions throughout the ancient world, knowing the bitter and the sweet is a prerequisite for judgment. You cannot evaluate without being able to categorize experience as one or the other. The entry places this evaluative capacity alongside writing as a paired transmission. First, the ability to assess, then the technology to record the assessment. The combination gives human beings an apparatus for producing and preserving judgment that, according to the text, they were not equipped to hold. The secrets of wisdom. The entry says Penemue taught these as well. The Charles text does not itemize which secrets. But the phrase places Penemue's crime in the same category as the broader forbidden knowledge transmissions of Chapter 8, where watchers taught metallurgy, divination, and the signs of the stars. The difference is that Penemue's transmission is cognitive and administrative rather than material, not how to smelt metal or enchant roots, how to think evaluatively and write the evaluation down. What the Penemue entry adds to the picture is an expansion of what the text considers a forbidden transmission. Gadriel taught weapons. Kasdeja, who comes next, will teach the techniques of harm to the soul and body. Those transmissions produce death directly. Writing produces contracts. Writing produces records. Writing produces the administrative infrastructure through which human beings enforce claims against one another across time. The path from literacy to death is not short. And the Book of Enoch says it is still running. The sentence is the same as the others, bound with the watchers in the valleys of the earth. Penemue, who gave human beings the capacity to read and write and evaluate, shares a prison with Yekon, who corrupted the desire of the holy sons of God, and with Aspiel, who gave a word. The containment does not distinguish between the scope of downstream harm. Writing has been transmitted. The transmission is described as ongoing in its effect. The sentence is not calibrated to the length of the chain. The fifth name after Penemue taught something with none of writing's appearance of neutrality. Where writing is a tool that can be put to any use, what Kasdeja transmitted was harm in categories, listed out, each with a specific target and mechanism. And the text introduces him with a phrase it has not used for any being before him in this chapter. Not one of the sons of God who descended, not a counselor who stayed behind. The text calls him the son of the serpent. His father has a name. The name is Tabaet. Number 5. Kasdeja. The fifth name in 1 Enoch chapter 69 is Kasdeja. The text introduces him with a phrase it has not used for any of the beings before him. He is described as the son of the serpent, whose name is Tabaet, not a watcher who descended from heaven, not one of the holy sons of God who swore the oath on Mount Hermon, a different lineage entirely. His father is a named serpent. 1 Enoch chapter 69, verses 12 through 15, R.H. Charles 1912. The fifth was named Kasdeja. This is he who showed the children of men all the wicked smitings of spirits and demons, and the smitings of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away, and the smitings of the soul, the bites of the serpent, and the smitings which befall through the noontide heat, the son of the serpent, whose name is Tabaet. 4 categories: the wicked smitings of spirits and demons, techniques for applying demonic force against human bodies; the smiting of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away, a technique for ending pregnancy before birth; the smitings of the soul, harm operating at a level that does not pass through the physical body; and the smitings that befall through the noontide heat, injury attributed to the destructive force of the midday sun, a category that appears in Mesopotamian demonology and in Psalm 91's reference to the destruction that wasteth at noonday. These are not the same kind of transmission as Penemue's writing. Writing is a technology. Its harm comes through its application to any number of purposes. What Kasdeja transmitted is harm as the content itself. There is no neutral use of the embryo smiting technique. There is no benign application of the wicked smitings of spirits and demons. The knowledge Kasdeja passed on was defined entirely by what it does to human beings at the most vulnerable points of their existence. The embryo entry is the one the text makes most explicit. The smitings of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away. The construction identifies a purpose. This is not a description of miscarriage as a natural event. The text is describing a technique, something taught, something learned, applied with the intent that the embryo does not survive. The word smiting places it in the same category as the other forms of harm in the list. A targeted action. A transmission of how to accomplish it. The soul-smiting entry is the one the text does not detail. The soul is harmed directly by a technique Kasdeja passed on, without the body as the intermediary pathway. How that operates, what mechanism the transmission describes, the text does not explain. The crime log names the category and proceeds. That is how Chapter 69 works. Name, crime, next entry. The noontide heat connects to a tradition visible across multiple ancient sources. In Mesopotamian demonology, demonic forces are associated with specific times of day and specific environmental conditions. The midday heat is one of the most documented of these. Psalm 91, a text many scholars of the ancient world read as a formal incantation against demonic attack, specifically invokes protection from the pestilence that walketh in darkness, and the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Kasdeja's transmission gives the children of men not protection from that force, the offensive knowledge of how to direct it. Now look at the lineage claim. Gadriel, whose crime is listed third in Chapter 69, is identified as the watcher who led Eve astray in the garden. That is one connection to the serpent tradition, a watcher entering the guarded space and doing what the Genesis account attributes to the serpent. Kasdeja is identified as the son of a named serpent. Two different connections to the serpent tradition, in two different entries of the same chapter, assigned to two different beings without explanation or reconciliation. The Book of Enoch places both in Chapter 69 and does not explain whether Tabaet and the serpent of Genesis 3 are the same being. It names Tabaet, establishes the lineage, and moves on. Tabaet does not appear anywhere else in the Charles text of 1st Enoch. The name appears once in this entry as the father of the being who taught the dark half of human medical and spiritual knowledge. The specificity of naming the serpent, giving the serpent a name at all, a name that appears nowhere else, suggests the tradition behind Chapter 69 had a fuller account of this lineage that the text as it survives does not preserve. The sentence for Kasdeja is the same as the sentence for Penemue and for Aspiel and for Gadriel, bound with the watchers in the valleys of the earth until the day of the great judgment. The son of the named serpent, who transmitted the techniques of harm across every category from the physical to the spiritual, shares a containment site with the being who gave evil counsel and the being who taught human beings to write. The next being in this list comes from the same Chapter 6 that names the 20 leaders of the descent. The fourth of those leaders transmitted something the text records in 3 words: the constellations. Not a navigational grid, a living architecture of divine agents, each with an appointment, each under commandment. In 1st Enoch's cosmology, the star system is not passive, it is inhabited. And teaching it to human beings was a crime of the same category as everything in Chapter 69. His name is Kokabiel. Number 6. Kokabiel. The fourth name in 1st Enoch Chapter 6 is Kokabiel. He is listed among the 20 leaders who swore the oath on Mount Hermon before the descent began, the commanders of the 200 who organized the agreement that brought them down to earth. His position in the list puts him just after the opening 3, and the teaching attributed to him in Chapter 8 is recorded in 3 words. 1st Enoch Chapter 8, verse 3, R.H., Charles 1912, Kokabiel, the constellations. No elaboration, no catalog of techniques. The crime log names the being, names the transmission, and moves to the next entry. For a reader who treats stars as astronomical objects, light sources at fixed distances, grouped into named patterns for navigation, 3 words is sufficient. The teaching was the constellations. What was transmitted was the pattern system of the sky. The problem is that 1st Enoch does not treat stars as astronomical objects. In 1st Enoch Chapter 18, Enoch is taken in a vision to a place at the ends of the earth. He sees something there that the text describes with precision: great mountains burning with fire, and among them something like stars bound in that fire. Chapter 18, verses 14 through 15, R.H., Charles 1912. And the angel said to me, "This place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. And the stars which roll over the fire are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times." These are not metaphors, they are beings. Stars that transgressed a commandment of the Lord, not a moral commandment about behavior toward others, but the commandment to appear at an appointed time. Stars that failed to rise when God scheduled them to rise. Stars imprisoned at the ends of the earth for that failure. Chapter 21 returns to the same location, and Uriel gives the same explanation. Stars and hosts of heaven that transgressed, sentenced for 10,000 years. The sentence structure is identical to the one applied to the Watchers, a class of beings that transgressed a divine commandment, a prison already in operation, a fixed term ending in judgment. The stars in 1st Enoch are not data points on a celestial map. They are agents of a divine order, with commandments they can obey or violate, with sentences that run in the same framework as the sentences for every other transgressor in the text. Kokabiel's name encodes this cosmology. Kochav, the Hebrew root for star, combined with El, the word for God, star of God. Not a being who studies stars or records their positions. A being whose name is built from the word for the class of divine agents he transmitted knowledge about. The fourth leader of the 200 taught the constellation system, a system that, in 1st Enoch's framework, is not a navigational grid but a living architecture of agents with commandments, appointed times, and the capacity for transgression. What teaching the constellations to human beings means in practice, the text does not explain. It names the transmission and places it in the same category of crime as every other disclosure in Chapter 8. That list covers Semjaza's enchantments and root cuttings, Arachiel's signs of the earth, Shamsiel's signs of the sun, Sariel's course of the moon, and Kokabiel's constellations. Taken together, these are not separate technologies. They are components of a single framework, the divine system by which God orders time, season, and event in creation. Each transmission gives human beings unauthorized access to a portion of that framework. The constellation portion is Kokabiel's. In 1st Enoch's understanding of the sky, the arrangements visible above are not patterns imposed on inert light. They are expressions of a living divine order, occupied by beings under commandment, organized into positions by God, appearing at times God assigned them. To receive that system from a watcher who carries the word for star in his own name is to receive access to a sign language that was not designed for human use. The argument has the same structure as the Penemue entry earlier in this list. Penemue taught writing, and the text holds that harmful, not because writing is inherently harmful, but because human beings were not constituted to use it without consequence. It changed how sin was recorded and how it accumulated. Kokabiel taught the constellations, and the text holds that harmful not because star patterns are inherently harmful, but because the constellation system, as 1st Enoch understands it, is a divine governance system, and teaching it to human beings gave them access to something they were not constituted to hold. The containment for Kokabiel is the containment for every bound watcher in the text. The valleys of the earth, the dark places beneath the hills, the prison described in Chapter 10 and surveyed in the vision sequences of Chapters 18 through 21. No individual geography named for him. No specific binding order singled out. Star of God, imprisoned where no stars reach, in the same valleys as every other leader of the 200. The next entry goes to the top of the list in Chapter 6, to the name that appears first, above Kokabiel, above all the others. The being who organized the oath, who ran the meeting that produced the mutual imprecation, who named the sin before it happened, and demanded that all 200 agree to share the penalty before he would proceed. His name is Semjaza. Number 7. Semjaza. In 1st Enoch chapter 6, the descent account does not open by describing the desire of the watchers or the beauty of the daughters of men. It opens with a leadership structure. The 200 who descended had 20 leaders, and the text names Semjaza first among them, not one of the leaders, their leader, the being at the top of the hierarchy who addressed the others when the plan was formed. What Semjaza does in chapter 6 is not simply organize the descent. He names the problem with it first. 1 Enoch chapter 6, verses 3 through 5, R.H. Charles 1912. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. Semjaza names the sin before the sin happens. He does not present the descent as permissible, or frame it as an ambiguous act with uncertain consequences. He calls it a great sin, explicitly, before anything has been done, and his stated fear is that he will be the only one who pays for it. The 200 do not respond by arguing that it is not a sin. They respond by agreeing to share the penalty, and, on that basis, they all swear. This is the hinge on which the entire descent account turns. An oath sworn not in ignorance, not in a moment of passion that overrode judgment, but by 200 beings who understood what they were agreeing to and organized themselves to face the consequences collectively. Semjaza is the one who ran that meeting. He introduced the problem of individual liability and designed the collective binding as the solution. The mutual imprecation, the oath in which each of the 200 cursed the others if any withdrew, is his structure. What Semjaza taught, according to chapter 8, was not the most dramatic entry in the list. 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 3, R.H. Charles 1912. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, two categories. Enchantments, operative formulae or ritual acts, through which force is directed at a person, an object, or a situation. Root cuttings, the techniques associated with plant-based binding and harm, the knowledge of which roots and in what configuration produce which effects on human bodies, or the events surrounding them. These are not weapons in the Gadriel sense, not the constellation system in the Kokabiel sense. They belong to a category of knowledge that predates metallurgy in the ancient imagination, the territory where spoken word, natural materials, and hidden force converge. Chapter 10 delivers the sentence, and what the sentence specifies is unlike anything in the other binding orders in the text. 1 Enoch chapter 10, verses 11 through 12, R.H. Charles 1912. And the Lord said unto Michael, Go, bind Semjaza and his associates, who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation. Two elements here are not present in any other binding order in the text. The first, the sons of Semjaza and his associates, the Nephilim, the giants who appear in chapter 7, consuming what human beings produced and turning on each other, are to kill one another. And Semjaza and his associates are to watch this happen before the chains close around them. The binding does not begin until after they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones. The sons they produce through the descent are taken from them first. Watching is part of the sentence. The second, the binding is measured in generations. 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment and their consummation. Not simply until the day of judgment, with no interval given. A count. 70 generations as the duration of the confinement before the final reckoning. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. The passages this list draws from are not the ones that circulate in most discussions of 1 Enoch, and the framework they describe for divine accountability is more detailed than most treatments of the text will show you. The watching came first. The destruction of the generation the 200 produced, the giants who consumed and killed and were destroyed, and Semjaza's associates were required to witness it before the valleys received them. The being who organized the oath, who named the sin before it happened, who ran the meeting and designed the mutual imprecation that bound all 200 to share the cost. He watched what the cost produced, and then the chains closed. 70 generations. The valleys of the earth. The dark places under the hills. The next leader in this list is not adjacent to Semjaza in the chapter 6 ranking. He is the 11th name among the 20, And what he taught is the only entry in the entire Chapter 8 catalog that is not about how to do something. It is about how to undo something. Number 8. Armaros. The 11th name in 1 Enoch chapter 6, among the 20 leaders of the 200, is Armaros. He is not near the top of the list. He does not command particular attention in the narrative of the descent. He swore the oath on Mount Hermon with the rest. He descended. And in chapter 8, where the crime catalog assigns each leader's transmission, his entry is one of the shortest in the chapter. 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 3. R.H. Charles 1912. Armaros. The resolving of enchantments. Read the chapter 8 list from the beginning, and the pattern is immediate. Azazel taught metalworking, weapons, cosmetics. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Barakajal taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Each entry names a form of knowledge that adds a capacity to human experience. Something that did not exist before the transmission is now available. The pattern runs consistently across every name in the catalog. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. That does not follow the pattern. Every other entry in Chapter 8 moves in one direction, from the watcher to the human, from the heavenly knowledge to the earthly application, adding a technique, adding a system, adding a means of acting on the world. The resolving of enchantments does not add, it reverses. Not a technique for doing something to the world, but a technique for undoing what has already been done to it. The catalog places this alongside every additive transmission, without marking it as a different category. Armaros's crime is listed in the same column as Semjaza's enchantments, as if passing on a counter-knowledge is a crime of the same type as passing on the original knowledge. The tension this creates within Chapter 8 is real, and the text does not resolve it. Semjaza taught how to make enchantments work. Armaros taught how to make them stop working. Both transmissions are on the same list. Both are part of the same body of crime, for which the 200 were sentenced. The being who could dissolve spiritual bindings swore the same oath on Mount Hermon as the being who created them. What this means in the lived experience of the people who received it, the text does not say. The crime log is not interested in reception history. It records the teaching and assigns the name. Whether Armaros's transmission enabled human beings to protect themselves against Semjaza's enchantments, or whether the resolving of enchantments was deployed against whatever spiritual bindings existed in creation before the descent, against the framework of divine order that the Watchers were disrupting by teaching the star system and the signs of the earth, the text gives no answer. It records Armaros, the resolving of enchantments. That is all the entry has. The name Armaros has been interpreted in different ways across the traditions that preserved and translated the text. Some readings connect it to a root, meaning accursed or condemned, a name marking the being as already under a form of prior judgment within the heavenly order, before the oath, before the descent. If that reading is correct, the being who dissolved bindings carried a name that was itself a kind of binding. The text does not confirm this. The name appears in Chapter 6 and in Chapter 8, and neither passage glosses it. Pay attention to what the structure of Chapter 8 reveals about how 1 Enoch categorizes transgression. The catalog does not distinguish between transmissions that increase human capacity and a transmission that decreases an existing constraint. Both appear under the same heading, what the Watchers taught that they were not supposed to teach. The resolving of enchantments is as much a crime in this framework as the teaching of enchantments, because the issue is not the nature of the knowledge, but the fact of unauthorized disclosure. Armaros passed on something that belonged to a domain human beings were not constituted to operate in. The direction of the knowledge, additive or subtractive, is secondary to the transgression of the boundary. The containment for Armaros is the containment for every bound watcher. The valleys of the earth, the dark places beneath the hills, the prison described in Chapter 10, and surveyed in the vision sequences of Chapters 18 through 21. No individual geography named specifically for him. No binding order singled out for Armaros the way Semjaza's order specifies that he watch the destruction of his sons before the chains close around him. The dissolving teacher and the enchantment teacher go to the same valley. The 11th leader's prison is the same prison as the first leader's prison. The 9th entry in this list comes from a section of 1 Enoch that none of the Watcher catalog entries reach. Not Chapter 6, not Chapter 8, not chapter 69. It comes from chapter 40, where Enoch sees 4 presences stationed before the Lord of Spirits on the 4 sides of God. The 4th of those presences has a function unlike anything in the crime catalog. Not a transgression and its sentence, but an ongoing assignment whose purpose is to keep something out of God's court. His name means the face of God, and what he holds back is a class of beings who want access to accuse the people of the earth. Number 9. Phanuel. There are 4 presences that stand before the Lord of Spirits in 1 Enoch chapter 40. 4 beings, described as different from those that sleep not, stationed on the 4 sides of God. The chapter names all 4 of them: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Phanuel. 3 of those names appear across Jewish and Christian tradition in contexts most readers have encountered. The 4th is the one this entry is about. 1 Enoch chapter 40, verses 2 through 9. R.H. Charles 1912. And after that I saw thousands of thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. I saw a multitude beyond number and reckoning, who stood before the Lord of Spirits. And on the 4 sides of the Lord of Spirits I saw 4 presences, different from those that sleep not, and I learnt their names. For the angel that went with me made known to me their names, and showed me all the hidden things. And I heard the voices of those 4 presences as they sang praises before the Lord of glory. The first voice blesses the Lord of Spirits forever and ever. The second voice I heard blessing the elect one and the elect ones who hang upon the Lord of Spirits. And the third voice I heard pray and intercede for those who dwell on the earth and supplicate in the name of the Lord of Spirits. And the fourth voice I heard expelling the Satans and forbidding them to come before the Lord of Spirits to accuse them who dwell on the earth. Each of the 4 voices has a function. Michael, blessing. Raphael, intercession for those who dwell on the earth. Gabriel, blessing directed at the elect one and the elect. And Phanuel, expelling the Satans and forbidding them from entering to accuse those who dwell on the earth. The word the text uses for Phanuel's action is expelling, not observing, not reporting, not requesting that the Satans leave, expelling and forbidding. The 4th presence's function is active, directional, and continuous. He stands in the position closest to God and keeps a class of beings out. Phanuel's name is translated in most readings as face of God, from the Hebrew root that also appears in the place name Peniel, where Jacob wrestles in Genesis 32. The name identifies the position, the face turned outward from God, the threshold between the divine presence and whatever approaches it. That is where Phanuel is stationed, and his function is to hold that threshold against the Satans. In 1 Enoch's framework, the Satans are not a single adversary. They are a class of accusers, plural, multiple beings, whose function in this age is to appear before the Lord of Spirits and bring accusations against the people of the earth. What Phanuel does is prevent them from carrying out that function. He expels them. He forbids them. He is the reason the accusation does not reach God's court in this age. What makes Phanuel unusual in the context of this list is his mode of containment. The watchers are bound in the valleys. The 70 shepherds are in the abyss of fire. The hot springs hold a portion of the condemned beneath them. All of those are architectural solutions: geographic, physical, spatial. Phanuel is not a location. He is not a chain or a valley or a set of chambers under the earth. He is a presence, a being with an assignment. The containment he provides is his own existence, in a specific role. This means his containment has a different relationship to time than the other containments in this list. The valleys will hold the watchers until the day of the great judgment. The abyss holds the 70 shepherds. The iron chains being forged in chapter 54 are a final solution for the Satans. But Phanuel's function is present age. He expels them now, in this age, from this court, while the chains are being made. He is not the end of the story for the Satans. He is the current arrangement until the end comes. This is why the 4th voice's function matters, as the 9th entry in this list, rather than as an afterthought. Phanuel is not simply a guard. He is what makes the current age different from the age after the final judgment. In this age, the Satans approach, and Phanuel expels them. In the age after the judgment, the iron chains close, and Phanuel's expulsion will be replaced by a permanent confinement. The transition from Phanuel's function to the chain's function is the transition from the current age to the judgment. The four presences in chapter 40 perform their functions continuously. The text describes them as part of the eternal liturgy before God's throne, voices that bless, intercede, and expel without interruption. Phanuel's expulsion of the Satans is not an occasional action. It is the ongoing condition of the court. Every approach the Satans make is met by the fourth voice. That is the current arrangement. And the 10th entry in this list is not a watcher, not a being from the descent account or the crime catalog of chapter 69. It is a creature placed in a specific location at the beginning of creation, a named wilderness, east of the garden where the elect and righteous dwell, east of the place from which Enoch, the seventh from Adam, was taken up, a being whose containment is not a sentence but a position, assigned by God, not imposed by punishment. Its name is Behemoth. Number 10. Behemoth. The 10th being on this list does not appear in the descent account. It is not named in chapter 6 or chapter 8. Its crime is not recorded in chapter 69. It has no part in the teaching of weapons, or writing, or enchantments, no connection to the oath on Mount Hermon, no relationship to the daughters of men. It is a creature of an entirely different order, introduced in chapter 60 of 1st Enoch, during a vision Enoch describes as occurring in his 500th year. 1st Enoch chapter 60, verses 7 through 8, R.H., Charles 1912. And on that day were two monsters parted, a female monster named Leviathan, to dwell in the abysses of the ocean, over the fountains of the waters. But the male is named Behemoth, who occupied with his breast a waste wilderness, named Duodain, on the east of the garden, where the elect and righteous dwell, where my grandfather was taken up, the seventh from Adam, the first man whom the Lord of Spirits created. 3 details in this passage are worth stopping on. First, Behemoth is male. The text is precise about this. The two monsters were separated on that day, Leviathan female, Behemoth male, and assigned to different locations. This is not incidental detail. The separation itself is the act of containment. No chain, no valley, no abyss of fire. The two monsters are parted from each other and placed in distinct geographic zones. What God did to Behemoth was not imprison him, it was place him. Second, the wilderness has a name, Duodain, not a general category of place, not the dark places, the ends of the earth, the valleys under the hills that hold the watchers. A specific named wilderness. Behemoth occupies it with his breast. The detail of the breast is physical. He lies in it, fills it. He is present in it as a fact of the landscape. The named wilderness and the named monster are matched to each other. Duodain is where Behemoth is. That is the sentence, in its entirety. He is there. Third, the location is defined by its relationship to 2 other fixed points in 1st Enoch's geography. The garden where the elect and righteous dwell, the resting place of the righteous, in 1st Enoch's cosmology, distinct from the garden of Genesis 3. And the place where my grandfather was taken up, Enoch's own words, identifying the location as the site of the ascent of the seventh from Adam, the first man whom the Lord of Spirits created. Behemoth's wilderness is east of both. The position of the monster is triangulated against the positions of the righteous and the ascending patriarch. The geography of 1st Enoch is not navigational. It is relational. Places mean what they are connected to. Duodain matters because of what surrounds it. The garden of the elect to the west. The ascent site of the seventh from Adam in the same proximity. Behemoth's position is determined not by what Behemoth did, but by where God placed him in relation to what is most sacred in the text's spatial imagination. What Behemoth did, the text does not describe as transgression. Chapter 60 does not say that Behemoth committed a crime and was assigned to the wilderness as punishment. The passage describes a separation, 2 monsters parted on that day, each sent to a different location. The framing is organizational, not penal. The divine response to Behemoth is placement, not sentence. This makes Behemoth categorically different from every other being in this list. Gadriel is bound in the valleys for his crimes. Yekon, Aspiel, Penemue, Kasdeja, bound. Kokabiel, Semjaza, Armaros, bound in the valleys of the earth under the sentence of chapter 10, watching the destruction of their sons before the chains closed, serving out 70 generations. Phanuel is stationed at the threshold of the divine court. Every being before this entry is either serving a sentence or executing an assignment tied to the crimes of the descent. Behemoth is placed. The wilderness named Duodain is not a prison. It is a location east of the garden. That is where God put him, and that is where he is. Chapter 60, verse 24, R.H. Charles, 1912. These two monsters shall be for a feast for all that remain. The monsters are not held in their locations as a punishment with no purpose. They are being preserved. The placement of Behemoth in Duodain and Leviathan in the ocean, over the fountains of the waters, is not simply containment for the sake of keeping dangerous creatures away from the world. It is preparation, an end-time provision. Both monsters, separated and held in their respective zones, are reserved for the feast that will mark the close of the age, a feast for those who remain when the judgment is complete. The containment of Behemoth is therefore unlike any other containment in this list on two counts. It is not punitive, there is no crime named, no sentence delivered, and it is not permanent in the sense of an ongoing confinement with a fixed term ending in destruction. Behemoth's position in Duodain ends with provision, not judgment. He is held east of the garden until the feast requires him. 10 entries, 9 named beings, and 1 class. A watcher who entered the garden and taught weapons of death. A being who corrupted the desire of the sons of God before the descent began. A counselor whose words set the descent in motion. A being who gave human beings the technology of writing. The son of a named serpent who transmitted the full range of harm to body and soul. The fourth leader of the 200 who taught the constellation system of a living divine order. The first leader who organized the oath, named the sin, and watched the destruction of his sons before the chains closed. The dissolving teacher, whose inverse transmission runs against the direction of every other entry in the catalog. The fourth presence at the divine court, whose name is the face of God, whose function is to hold the threshold against the accusers. And the male monster in the named wilderness east of the garden, lying in Duodain with his breast preserved for the end. For 9 of them, the divine response is already in operation. For 1, the location is the response, and the location has been assigned since creation. If this is the kind of content you want to keep seeing, subscribe. The Book of Enoch is much larger than the passages that circulate in most discussions of the text, and the framework it builds for cosmic order, divine accounting, and the architecture of what God contains and what God preserves goes into more detail than most treatments of the text will show you. There is more.